Have you ever wondered why some of the most extraordinary people, visionaries, healers, leaders, or creatives, almost always seem to come from broken or toxic families? It's almost like a cruel paradox. The very people destined to bring healing to the world are often the ones who grow up in the most dysfunctional environments. They're the ones who endure neglect, criticism, abuse, or rejection from the people who were supposed to protect and nurture them. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and father of depth psychology, believed there was no coincidence in this pattern. In fact, he argued that such suffering is often the very foundation for transformation. He called this dynamic the sacred wound, a deep injury to the soul that, while painful, carries within it the seed of awakening. For Jung, the toxic family isn't just a misfortune. It's the stage upon which the chosen individual begins their initiation into becoming something greater than themselves. So in this video, we'll dive deep into Jung's insights and explore why chosen ones are born into toxic families, how their wounds shape their destiny, and why the pain of their childhood is not meaningless but sacred. By the end, you'll see how suffering can actually become the doorway to transformation, and why the very thing that tried to break you may have been the force shaping you into who you were always meant to become. 1. The archetype of the chosen one. Across history and cultures, the figure of the chosen one has always stood out. In myths, religions, and even modern storytelling, there's often a character who carries a unique destiny. Think about Moses being abandoned in a basket, Jesus born into poverty and later rejected by his own people, or even fictional characters like Harry Potter, who was orphaned and forced to live under the stairs in a neglectful home. The pattern is striking. Greatness is almost always born from pain. Carl Jung believed this was no coincidence. He argued that myths and stories are not just entertainment, they are symbolic expressions of deep psychological truths. The chosen one archetype is the story of the human soul striving toward individuation, toward becoming whole. But to awaken this inner potential, something must first shake the individual out of comfort, out of complacency, and into the depths of suffering. In other words, the toxic family is not just a random misfortune. It's the initiation chamber where the chosen one's journey begins. Their pain becomes their first trial, their first encounter with the harshness of existence. And unlike others who might live sheltered lives, the chosen one learns early on that the world is not safe, that love is not always guaranteed, and that survival requires strength, awareness, and resilience. 2. Family as the crucible of the psyche. Family is supposed to be a place of safety, love, and belonging. But for many chosen ones, it becomes the opposite, a battleground where they face rejection, neglect, or emotional chaos. Jung emphasized that families are the first arena in which our psyche is formed. Here, parents unconsciously pass down not just love, but also their unresolved traumas, their fears, their shadows. In a toxic family, this process becomes intensified. A narcissistic parent might use the child as an emotional punching bag, projecting their insecurities onto them. A neglectful parent might fail to provide the validation a child needs to feel worthy. A controlling parent might suffocate the child's individuality. These experiences leave lasting marks. Yet, paradoxically, this environment becomes the very thing that awakens the chosen one. Because they are denied safety, they are forced to find strength. Because they are denied validation, they are forced to search inward for meaning. Because they are denied unconditional love, they develop empathy for others who suffer. In short, the family's dysfunction becomes the soil in which the sacred wound is planted. 3. Carl Jung and the sacred wound. Jung often said that the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, only outgrown. The sacred wound represents such a problem. It cannot be erased, the toxic childhood cannot be undone. But it can be transformed. The sacred wound is the paradoxical gift of suffering. On one hand, it leaves scars, feelings of unworthiness, loneliness, or grief. On the other, it forces the psyche to expand, to grow in ways it never would have without the pain. In Jungian terms, it pushes the individual onto the path of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole and authentic. For the chosen one, the sacred wound is what awakens the call. It's what sets them apart from their peers. While others may drift through life without questioning its deeper meaning, the chosen one is confronted early with suffering that demands reflection, healing, and ultimately transformation. 4. The shadow and projection in families. One of Jung's most powerful contributions to psychology is the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. In families, parents often project their shadows onto their children. A father who feels weak may call his son cowardly. A mother who feels unworthy may shame her daughter for seeking attention. In this way, children become scapegoats for the unresolved pain of their parents. Chosen ones often play this scapegoat role. They become the problem child, the black sheep, the one who just doesn't fit. But what's really happening is projection. The family is unconsciously loading its darkness onto the chosen child. It's a painful role, but one that has a hidden gift. Because the chosen one is forced to wrestle with this shadow material so directly, they develop a deeper awareness of psychological truth. They see things others ignore. They sense hypocrisy. They detect the unspoken pain in others. This awareness is the seed of wisdom, but it comes at a heavy price: loneliness, alienation, and the feeling of being misunderstood. 5. Suffering as initiation. In many indigenous and ancient traditions, initiation rites involved suffering, rituals of isolation, physical pain, or symbolic death. These ordeals weren't cruelty, they were designed to awaken the initiate to life's deeper realities. In a similar way, the toxic family becomes the chosen one's initiation rite. The pain of neglect, abuse, or rejection forces the child to grow up faster, to see truths that others are shielded from. It becomes their fire trial, burning away innocence and forcing them to forge resilience. For Jung, suffering was never meaningless. It was a passage into greater depth of consciousness. This doesn't mean the suffering is fair or that anyone deserves it. But when seen through a Jungian lens, it becomes clear why chosen ones are born into such families. The suffering serves as their awakening. Without it, they may never have embarked on their journey of individuation. 6. Individuation through toxic environments. Individuation is the process of becoming your true self, distinct from collective expectations or family conditioning. For most people, individuation is a gradual process, but for chosen ones, it becomes urgent. In a toxic family, conformity often means self-betrayal. The chosen one learns that to survive psychologically, they must resist. While siblings may conform to the family system, taking on roles like the golden child, the enabler, or the peacemaker, the chosen one often becomes the rebel. They refuse to play along with lies or pretense, even if it costs them love or acceptance. This rebellion, painful as it is actually a profound act of individuation. It is the soul saying, "I cannot become what you want me to be. I must become myself." This courage to stand apart is the seed of true authenticity, a trait that later allows chosen ones to lead, heal, and inspire others. 7. Trauma as a catalyst for transformation. Modern psychology supports Jung's insights. Studies on trauma survivors show that many develop what's known as post-traumatic growth, a phenomenon where suffering leads to greater empathy, creativity, and resilience. Chosen ones embody this principle. Their sacred wound sensitizes them to the pain of others. Having endured darkness themselves, they often feel called to alleviate it in others. This is why so many healers, therapists, artists, and spiritual teachers come from broken backgrounds. Their trauma became their training ground. What once was a source of shame or grief becomes their source of strength. They transform pain into wisdom, scars into stories, and wounds into medicine for others. 8. Jung's wounded healer archetype. Jung was deeply inspired by the Greek myth of Chiron, the wise centaur who suffered an incurable wound yet became a great healer and teacher. This archetype, the wounded healer, is central to understanding chosen ones. Their own wounds do not disqualify them from helping others, they are what qualify them. Unlike those who have never suffered, chosen ones heal with authenticity. They don't just offer theories, they offer lived experience. Their presence itself becomes healing because others can feel that they truly understand suffering. In this way, the sacred wound becomes a calling. The chosen one is not just healing for themselves, they are preparing to heal others, to guide, to inspire, and to break cycles of pain. 9. The spiritual dimension of the sacred wound. Beyond psychology, there is a spiritual dimension to the sacred wound. Many spiritual traditions teach that suffering is the doorway to awakening. The toxic family strips away illusions and forces the chosen one to face deep existential truths, that life is fragile, that love is not guaranteed, that safety is not permanent. For Jung, individuation always carried a spiritual element. It was not just about psychological growth but about connecting to the self, a higher, transcendent principle guiding one's destiny. The sacred wound acts as the doorway to this connection. By surviving the darkness of the family, the chosen one learns to trust an inner guidance greater than external validation. This is why so many spiritual leaders have histories of suffering. Their sacred wounds attune them to the deeper dimensions of reality, opening them to wisdom that others often overlook. 10. Breaking generational curses. One of the most profound roles of the chosen one is to break generational cycles. Toxic families rarely begin with one generation. The pain is passed down, trauma, abuse, neglect, like an invisible inheritance. The chosen one, however, refuses to carry it forward. By confronting the shadow, seeking healing, and choosing a different path, they break the chain. They stop the cycle from repeating in their own relationships, their own children, or their own communities. This is not easy work, it requires immense courage. But it is sacred work. Jung believed that healing the individual's psyche contributes to healing the collective. Every chosen one who confronts and transforms their sacred wound is not just healing themselves, they are healing generations past and future. Conclusion: the gift of the sacred wound. So why are chosen ones born into toxic families? Because it is within that crucible of suffering that the sacred wound is born. And it is through that wound that the chosen one is initiated into their destiny. Carl Jung's teachings remind us that pain is not meaningless. The very wound that once seemed like a curse becomes the seed of transformation. The rejection, the neglect, the abuse, it all becomes the forge where resilience, empathy, and wisdom are created. The paradox of the sacred wound is this: the very thing that tried to break you is also the thing that shaped you into who you were always meant to be. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of the chosen one archetype. That suffering is not the end of the story, but the beginning of awakening.